The murder of Jill Dando shocked the United Kingdom and left a nation searching for answers that remain elusive to this day. Talented journalist, newsreader and television presenter, Dando was known to millions as a friendly, familiar face on shows like Crime Watch, BBC Breakfast News and Holiday. On the morning of April 26, 1999, that warm presence was tragically taken from the world. Returning to her Fulham home after staying at her fiancé's house, Jill was gunned down on her doorstep in broad daylight. The killing prompted the largest murder investigation in the UK since the hunt for the Yorkshire Ripper. One man was convicted, later acquitted, and the case remains unsolved. Today we'll explore Jill's life, the day she was killed, the investigation, the theory surrounding her death, and her lasting legacy. This story blends heartbreak, mystery, and the shadow of unanswered questions. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, where we dive deep into the unsolved, the unexplained, and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we're looking at the case of Jill Dando, where a talented and popular television star was gunned down in her prime. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, and stick around to the end where I give my thoughts on what I really think happened on that day. This is the story of Jill Dando. Jill Wendy Dando was born on November 9, 1961 in Weston-super-Mare, a town in the county of Somerset in the UK. From an early age, she showed determination and resilience. Born with a heart defect, she underwent surgery at just 3 years old, yet went on to excel academically, becoming head girl at her sixth form and later studying journalism at the South Glamorgan Institute of Higher Education. Her career began in local newspapers, but Jill quickly moved to the BBC, first as a radio newsreader and then as a national television presenter. Over the years, she became one of the UK's most recognisable faces, presenting Breakfast Time, BBC 1 o'clock news, the 6 o'clock news, Holiday, Crime Watch and occasionally Songs of Praise. She won the BBC Personality of the Year award in 1997. Jill's colleagues remember her as hard-working, warm and humble, always willing to mentor others. She was also a committed Baptist and engaged in charity work, particularly during the Kosovo crisis, where she fronted appeals for refugees. By 1999, she had moved to Fulham and was engaged to gynecologist Alan Farthing, planning a wedding for later that year. Despite her high-profile career, Jill remained down to earth, connecting with audiences through her honesty, compassion and professionalism. Her life and work left a lasting impact on British journalism and television. On April 26, 1999, Jill Dando, at the time 37, left her fiancé Alan Farthing's home in Chiswick in the morning and drove to her house in Fulham to collect contract documents. Though she owned the property, she rarely visited as she was in the process of selling it. At around 11:32 a.m, as she reached her front door, tragedy then struck. Somebody grabbed her from behind, forcing her to the ground. With one hand he held her in place, and with the other he fired a single shot into her left temple. The bullet entered just above her ear and exited the right side of her head, killing her instantly. Her neighbour, Helen Doble, discovered Jill's body about 14 minutes later. Police were called at 11:47. The 999 emergency call made by Helen Doble immediately after discovering the TV presenter's lifeless body on her doorstep is a haunting and pivotal piece of evidence in the case. The call vividly captures the shock and distress of the moment, providing a real-time account of the tragic event. Hall was featured in the BBC documentary The Murder of Jill Dando, which aired on BBC 1. In this documentary, Helen Doble retraces her steps on that tragic day, offering insights into her harrowing discovery. The footage from the documentary includes the 999 call, showcasing the urgency and emotional turmoil experienced by Doble as she reported the incident to emergency services. The emergency services then arrived shortly. Jill was pronounced dead at Charing Cross Hospital shortly after 1 p.m. The attack was at once shocking and calculated at the same time. Witness Richard Hughes, living next door, reported hearing a scream but no gunshot. He saw a man roughly 6 foot tall walking away from the scene, the only confirmed sighting of the killer. Forensic analysis revealed the gun was a 9mm semi-automatic, likely a converted blank firing pistol, pressed hard against her head to muffle the sound. The scene raised immediate questions. Why Fulham, when Jill spent most of her time at her fiancé's home? Why leave a spent cartridge at the scene? And who could commit such a brazen murder in broad daylight? The country watched in disbelief as news of the murder spread. Jill's high-profile career, charitable work, and affable public personality made her loss deeply personal for millions around the UK. This horrifying day would set in motion the largest investigation in the UK since the Yorkshire Ripper case, spanning thousands of interviews, multiple suspects, and decades of speculation. The Metropolitan Police launched Operation Oxborough immediately after Jill's murder. The investigation was enormous, with detectives canvassing witnesses, gathering CCTV footage, and reviewing thousands of leads. Within 6 months, over 2,500 people were interviewed and more than 1,000 statements were taken. Early lines of inquiry focused on Jill's personal circle. Her agent, John Roseman, knew she was visiting Fulham that morning, but was cleared as a suspect. Ex-boyfriend Bob Wheaton also came under scrutiny, particularly regarding a £35,000 bank transfer, but he too was eliminated. Authorities quickly ruled out a professional assassin initially, citing the unusual choice of location, the use of a low-velocity converted pistol, and leaving the spent cartridge behind. Theories ranged from a stalker or obsessed fan to a contract killing linked to her work on Crime Watch. Forensic analysis confirmed the bullet was fired from a weapon modified to shoot live ammunition, but lacking rifling, making it almost certainly a converted blank pistol. Police profilers suggested the killer could be a loner with a severe personality disorder. Sightings of strange men in the area at the time were reported and investigated. A man was seen running along the street around the time of the murder, another was seen speaking to a traffic warden, and a black Jeep was caught on CCTV speeding away from the scene. Although these individuals were seen as persons of interest, the trail they left has remained cold. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to a man named Barry George, who was living near Dando's home and had a history of stalking and photographing women. Evidence recovered from his apartment, including photographs of women and a photo of him holding a similar pistol, made him prime suspect. Yet many critics argue that the case against George was circumstantial and flawed. Despite massive media coverage and extensive investigative efforts, no immediate breakthrough occurred. The case remained unsolved for over a year, frustrating the public and indeed the police. Even today, debates continue about the thoroughness of the original investigation and whether the killer exploited gaps in the investigation to evade capture. Barry George lived close to Jill Dando's Fulham home and had a history of antisocial behaviour, SA offences and obsessive tendencies. He was known for photographing hundreds of women in public, often covertly. After Jill's murder, police searched his bedsit and found thousands of photographs of women, cuttings about TV personalities, and a picture of George holding a blank firing gun, similar to the one used in Jill's murder. George was arrested on May 25th in the year 2000 and charged 3 days later. His trial began in 2001 at the Old Bailey in London. The prosecution emphasised his obsession with women and firearms, his proximity to Dando's home, and forensic evidence, including a particle of gunshot residue in his coat pocket. Witnesses also claimed to have seen him acting suspiciously in or around her street at the time. The defence countered, suggesting George was not at the scene and that Dando's murder could have been the work of a professional hitman, a Serbian operative, or another unknown assailant. They questioned the validity of the gunshot residue, pointing out potential contamination, and highlighted George's lack of direct evidence linking him to Jill. After 30 hours of jury deliberation, George was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. However, his conviction was quashed in 2008 after the discredited forensic evidence was excluded. His acquittal left the case unsolved and reignited debates about whether George was wrongly accused and who the true killer might be. The murder of Jill Dando remains one of the most baffling and high-profile unsolved cases in the United Kingdom. Over 20 years after her death, people continue to speculate, debate, and theorise about who killed the beloved TV presenter and why. While Barry George was convicted and later acquitted, his case is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Let's take a deep dive into the theories that have circulated over the years, from professional assassins to obsessed fans, political motives, and a random tragedy. One of the earliest theories suggests that Jill Dando's murder was politically motivated, linked to the Kosovo conflict in 1999. During Operation Allied Force, NATO bombed the radio television of Serbia headquarters in Belgrade, resulting in multiple deaths just days before Dando was killed. Some theorists propose that Dando's prominent role in a BBC appeal for Kosovar Albanian refugees may have drawn the attention of Serbian hardliners who wanted retribution for the NATO bombings. Supporting this theory are several intriguing coincidences. Just days before Dando's death, a Serbian journalist critical of the regime was assassinated outside his home in Belgrade using a method similar to the one used on Dando. Additionally, telephone calls were made to the BBC and other media outlets claiming responsibility for the killing on behalf of Serbian groups, stating it was revenge for the NATO campaign. Some investigators noted similarities in bullet casings that suggest links to Yugoslav ammunition. However, critics of this theory point out major flaws. If Dando were the target of Serbian extremists, it seems unlikely that she, a UK TV presenter, would be chosen over somebody more directly involved in NATO operations. No credible intelligence or evidence has definitively tied her murder to Serbian groups. The prosecution at Barry George's trial dismissed the idea as utter nonsense, though speculation persists among journalists and armchair sleuths. Another theory is that Jill Dando was killed on the orders of a London-based organised crime figure, sometimes referred to as Mr. Big. Investigative journalist Mark Williams Thomas suggested Dando's death was intended as a message to anyone interfering with organised crime: do not cross us. This theory leans on the seemingly professional nature of the attack: a single well-aimed shot, the weapon pressed to her head to muffle the sound, and the clean escape. Some supporters suggest that Dando's work on Crime Watch could have irritated criminals as she was exposing crimes to a national audience, potentially jeopardising illicit operations. The skeptics argue that the attack was far from flawless. The spent cartridge remained at the scene, the gun was a low-velocity modified starting pistol or blank-firing weapon, and Dando was killed at her rarely used Fulham home, which would be a risky location for a professional assassin. Furthermore, her work on Crime Watch had been ongoing for years without attracting any direct threats. The idea of a stalker or obsessed fan is perhaps one of the most plausible theories when considering the crime scene and the method of the attack. Stalkers tend to act opportunistically, often without sophisticated planning, and the attack on Dando had hallmarks of an individual acting on impulse or fixation. Shortly before her death, Dando had reportedly been concerned about a man pestering her. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a man loitering near her street, both the night before and the morning of the murder. In the trial against Barry George, the prosecution leaned on this theory, stating that not everyone is rational. There is a dark, complex side to some people's minds that cause them to act in a dreadfully destructive way for no rational reason. Yet the theory has weaknesses. No famous person in the UK had been killed by a stalker before, and police investigated over 140 individuals flagged for obsessive behaviour towards Dando, eliminating them from any suspicion. Even so, the possibility of a previously unknown, highly determined stalker remains open. Barry George is the most well-known figure associated with this case. Living close to Dando's Fulham home, George had a history of antisocial behaviour, a fascination with firearms, and interest in female celebrities. Police discovered thousands of covert photos of women in his possession and initially linked him circumstantially to the murder. George was convicted in 2001, largely on the basis of a single particle of gunshot residue found in his overcoat. However, his conviction was overturned in 2008 after the evidence was discredited. Some theorists believe George may have been involved despite the lack of definitive evidence. Others see him as a convenient scapegoat. His case demonstrates how easily circumstantial evidence can dominate a high-profile investigation, leaving the true perpetrator at large. Some have speculated that Dando's work on Crime Watch put her in the crosshairs of criminals that she had exposed. The defence in George's trial suggested that someone could have wanted to send a warning to those using media to aid police investigations. Yet law enforcement looked at every Crime Watch case Dando had presented and found no compelling reason for retaliation. Critics also argue that criminals seeking revenge would likely target the informer or the police, not a TV presenter reporting the story. Cold case reviews have suggested Dando may have been the victim of a professional high-precision killing. The technique, a gun pressed to the head, muffled sound, single shot, supports the idea of a hard contact execution. But again, the choice of location is puzzling. Dando spent most of her time at her fiancé's home, meaning her Fulham residence was not a predictable target. Investigators struggled with this contradiction, an apparently professional method paired with an unpredictable, low-traffic location. Another theory says that Dando was not the intended target. A professional or amateur killer could have mistakenly identified her as somebody else. This is largely speculative, as the attack occurred at her own front door, making mistaken identity less plausible. After the Jimmy Savile scandal emerged, some conspiracy theorists suggested that Dando may have uncovered misconduct at the BBC and was silenced. This theory is purely speculative, with no supporting evidence, but it remains a point of discussion amongst true crime enthusiasts. Finally, there's the possibility that Dando's murder was a tragic random act of violence. While rare for a public figure, it cannot be entirely ruled out. The crime scene's combination of amateurish and meticulous aspects could point to an unhinged individual acting without clear motive. Across these theories, one theme stands out. Jill Dando's murder continues to be a puzzle of contradictions. The attack was at once precise and amateurish, personal and impersonal, public yet intimate. Even after decades of investigation, no single theory fully explains why or how such a crime was committed, leaving her murder one of the most enduring mysteries in British criminal history. Okay, I'm going to run through the theories very quickly and just explain what I think happened in this case. It's a very tricky one. Evidence sort of points one way or the other. A lot of lines in the case, again, don't add up. The people that were seen leaving the scene or around the scene at the time, not much is known about them. There's the CCTV of the car, the black Jeep that was seen and never tracked down. I don't believe it was a gangland or mob-related hit. It doesn't seem like that kind of thing. A stalker or obsessed fan. This goes along with the Barry George thing as well. I think somebody of that like that, there's no way they would have got away with it and not told someone or not given themselves away if they were that sort of disturbed in their mind. As for Barry George himself was sort of a teller of tall stories allegedly, so there was no way he would be able to keep that quiet if he had done it. I think relating to Crime Watch, possibly not. I get it's a possibility, but I think they'd have to know where she would be at that time. And if you look at the CCTV of Jill Dando during the day, there's no suggestion that she's been followed. So I think somebody knew at that time she'd have to be there. So who knew that she was there? Not going to name any names. It's all allegedly. I think this was set up. I don't think it's anything to do with sort of the Jimmy Savile thing or the BBC investigations or mistaken identity or just a random crime. I don't think that makes any sense. What I do think is somebody knew that she was going to be there. I think it was sort of a planned assassination, but the reason for it, I don't think we know, and I don't think we'll ever know. It's a very tricky one. The most plausible of the ones that, whether it being the Serbian or Yugoslav thing, again, they'd have to know that she'd be there. How would they know that when they'd have to be hanging around just waiting for her and waiting for her all this time? I do think, like I said, it is premeditated. I just don't think we will know why, and I don't think we will ever find out for this one. That's my thought on this case. As usual, it is purely speculative. It's all alleged. I don't believe anything of these as fact. Put your comments in the section below. What do you think happened to Jill Dando? Was it any of the theories that we've mentioned already, or was it something else? Let me know. Jill Dando's murder left a lasting impression on British media, law enforcement and public consciousness. Her funeral, held on May 21st, 1999 in Weston-super-Mare, was attended by friends, family, colleagues and admirers. She was buried next to her mother, and her father inherited her estate. In her memory, her fiancé, Alan Farthing, and BBC colleague Nick Ross established the Jill Dando Institute of Crime Science at University College London in 2001, raising nearly £1.5 million. The Institute focuses on innovative crime science research and remains a lasting tribute to Jill's commitment to public service and safety. The BBC also set up a bursary for aspiring broadcast journalists, and her hometown dedicated a building at Weston College to her memory. In 2023, Netflix released Who Killed Jill Dando, a 3-part documentary examining her life, death and investigation, keeping the conversation alive and ensuring that new generations learn about her story. Though the case remains unsolved, Jill Dando's legacy endures through her work, the initiatives in her name, and the ongoing fascination with one of the UK's most puzzling murders. Her life and tragic death continue to remind the public of the fragility of life and the impact one person can have on the world. Thank you for watching this episode. What do you think happened to Jill? Put your theories in the comments section, and while you're there, don't forget to like and subscribe for more of these cases. I'll see you all next time, but until then, keep listening for the echoes. Some crimes don't just make headlines, they scar entire communities. They're the kind of cases that people whisper about for decades, the police struggle with year after year, and the families are forced to relive every time a new lead fizzles out. What happened in Austin, Texas in 1991 wasn't just another unsolved murder. It was an act so brutal, so senseless, that it left even hardened detectives shaken. A crime scene so disturbing that people who saw it still struggle to talk about it to this day. For more than 3 decades, this case has remained one of the darkest mysteries in American history, until finally in 2025, the truth was revealed. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, where we dive deep into the unsolved, the unexplained, and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we're looking at the brutal Austin yogurt shop murders, a crime so brutal it hardly bears thinking about. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this type of content, and stay tuned until the end, where we reveal what really happened on that dark night in Texas. Before this crime became one of the most infamous cases in Texas history, it was just another Friday night for 4 teenage girls in Austin. They weren't famous, they weren't controversial, they weren't living dangerous lives. They were just normal kids, which is partly what makes this whole story so chilling. The 4 victims were Jennifer Harbison, 17, her younger sister Sarah, 15, and their friends Eliza Thomas, 17, and Amy Ayres, 13. They were described as sweet, hard-working, and inseparable. Jennifer and Eliza both worked at the I Can't Believe It's yogurt shop in Austin's North Side, a popular little spot where teenagers picked up shifts and locals stopped in after dinner. Sarah and Amy had just come by to hang out. Jennifer was the kind of older sister who looked out for Sarah but also gave her enough room to grow. She was focused on school, active in extracurricular activities, and had plans for the future that were cut short far too soon. Sarah, just a sophomore at the time, was known for her bubbly personality and her tendency to make friends wherever she went. Eliza was Jennifer's co-worker, a fellow high schooler with a similar drive and ambitions. Friends described her as responsible and dependable, the kind of teen who could be trusted to lock up the yogurt shop at night without a second thought. And then there was Amy. At just 13, she was the youngest of the group. Still in middle school, she adored hanging out with the older girls and looked up to them. This was supposed to be an ordinary night, a safe night, just friends, closing up shop and maybe grabbing a bite afterwards. That's what makes what happened next so gut-wrenching. These weren't kids who had gotten caught up in anything dangerous. There was no reason to suspect they'd crossed paths with evil. And yet, in the early hours of December 7th, 1991, their lives were violently and brutally taken inside the very yogurt shop where 2 of them worked. It's easy looking back to get lost in the crime itself, the horror, the confusion, the decades of investigation. Before we dive into all that, it's important to remember who these girls were. 4 bright, ordinary teens with their whole lives ahead of them. Lives that should never have ended the way that they did. December 6, 1991 was supposed to be a typical Friday night at I Can't Believe It's Yogurt in North Austin. Jennifer and Eliza were working the closing shift, while Sarah and Amy hung out, chatting and laughing the way teenagers do when the night feels endless. By 11 p.m, the lights inside the shop dimmed, the open sign flipped to close, and the girls began tidying up. Nothing seemed unusual. But sometime after midnight, the ordinary turned into something unimaginably horrific. Neighbours later reported faint smoke in the air, but at first, no one thought much of it. Fires weren't exactly common, but they weren't unheard of either. What was strange, though, was how quickly the smoke thickened. By the early morning hours of December 7th, flames were ripping through the small yogurt shop. Firefighters arrived fast. To them, it was just another late-night blaze in a strip mall, until they pushed inside. And what they found would haunt them forever. Fire itself was small and quickly contained. The scene it revealed was beyond comprehension. Inside, they discovered the bodies of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza and Amy. The victims were found bound and gagged, some partially undressed, and all had been shot. The blaze had been set deliberately, clearly meant to cover up the crime. But it hadn't destroyed enough. The truth of what happened inside the shop could be erased with the fire. Even seasoned first responders broke down at the sight. Austin had seen violent crime before, but nothing of this scale. 4 young girls murdered together, their lives extinguished in an instant. Brutality was staggering, and the randomness made it even worse. News spread quickly, and Austin, a city better known for music festivals and college life, was shaken to its core. People flocked to the site, leaving flowers, cards and candles. Parents clutched their children a little tighter. Teenagers who had worked the same shifts at similar shops wondered, what if it had been me? The crime scene, however, was a nightmare for investigators. The fire had done its job, not in destroying everything, but in complicating everything else. Physical evidence was scarce, and what little remained had to be carefully preserved. Detectives immediately suspected multiple perpetrators. The sheer logistics of controlling 4 victims at once seemed too much for a lone killer. But beyond that, nothing. No obvious motive, no clear suspect, no quick arrests. Just 4 young lives ended in an act so senseless and violent that it defied explanation. That night transformed the yogurt shop from a cheerful after-school hangout into a site of tragedy. The walls still smelled of smoke when the first investigators arrived, and even as they began their work, one thing was clear. Austin would never forget what happened there. This wasn't just murder, this was a massacre, and for decades, the question would hang in the air. Who could do something so unspeakable, and why? From the very beginning, the investigation into the Austin yogurt shop murders was massive and messy. The sheer brutality of the crime demanded answers, and the community wanted them fast. But detectives quickly discovered they were walking into one of the most difficult cases in Texas history. First, the crime scene itself was already compromised. The fire, although small, had scorched key areas, melted evidence, and left behind the unmistakable smell of accelerant. Investigators were able to confirm arson, but finding usable fingerprints or DNA in that burned-out shop was like searching for a needle in a haystack that had already gone up in flames. Still, they worked with what they had. Ballistics testing confirmed the girls had been shot with at least 2 different weapons, strengthening the belief that there were multiple attackers. The bindings used on the victims suggested the killers had come prepared. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment robbery gone wrong. It felt organised, cold and deliberate. Detectives interviewed anyone connected to the girls, family members, friends, classmates and co-workers. Nothing pointed to a personal grudge. Girls were universally described as kind, outgoing and normal teenagers. That only deepened the horror. They weren't targeted because of who they were. They were targeted because they were vulnerable. The investigation quickly ballooned in size. Police chased down hundreds of tips, some as vague as suspicious man near the strip mall, others more specific, like a white Chevy pickup seen speeding away around the time of the fire. But every promising lead seemed to collapse under scrutiny. Meanwhile, the media descended on Austin. The story wasn't just local anymore. National outlets ran headlines about the yogurt shop killings. The pressure on Austin PD was immense. Detectives were working 18-hour days, combing through mountains of reports, trying to piece together what happened. The FBI was eventually brought in to assist, especially given the potential for multiple suspects and the disturbing possibility that the killers might strike again. But even with the federal resources, progress was painfully slow. The lack of hard physical evidence became the investigation's biggest hurdle. DNA technology in 1991 wasn't what it is today. Profiles weren't as reliable, testing was slower, and databases were limited. The few samples investigators did recover were too degraded to provide a clear match. And so the case began to lean heavily on witness testimony. Unfortunately, witnesses were inconsistent. Some people claimed to have seen men hanging around the shop late that night. Others thought they heard gunshots. But nothing was concrete, and memories shifted over time. What the police did have, however, was a city living in fear. Parents wouldn't let their kids close a shop late at night. Businesses invested in more security. Austin's easygoing reputation took a hit, replaced by an uneasy awareness that danger could strike anywhere and at any time. In the months following the murders, detectives kept returning to one central question. Was this a robbery gone wrong, or something more sinister? A small amount of cash missing from the register suggested robbery may have been part of it. The overkill violence didn't match. Why kill 4 teenage girls execution style for just a few dollars? By the end of the first year, police had thousands of pages of reports, dozens of suspects, and a community desperate for answers. They were no closer to solving the case, and as time went on, desperation would lead them down dangerous paths, ones that resulted in wrongful arrests, false confessions, and years of wasted time. If the investigation into the Austin yogurt shop murders had been a tangled mess in its early months, the years that followed made it look even worse. With little physical evidence, detectives have increasingly leaned on tips, confessions, and sheer gut instinct, and that path led to one of the most infamous series of wrongful arrests in Texas history. First came the tips that went nowhere. Austin PD was flooded with calls from psychics, concerned citizens, and people who swore their ex-boyfriend, ex-husband, or creepy neighbour must have done the deed. Some tips even contradicted each other outright, but detectives, under relentless public pressure, chased down every single one, hoping something would stick. Then came the confessions. Within a few years, multiple men admitted to being involved. Problem? None of them were telling the truth. Some were mentally ill, some wanted attention, and some thought confessing might help them in unrelated cases. One man even confessed in detail, but later admitted he had pulled the story from media coverage. None of these confessions matched the crime scene evidence. But in 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, police believed they had finally cracked the case. They arrested 4 young men: Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Morris Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn. Pierce had originally been picked up in 1991 with a .22 caliber gun, same type of weapon used in the murders. That alone kept him on police radar for years. Eventually, investigators leaned on Pierce's circle of friends, and after long high-pressure interrogations, both Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen confessed. Their statements, however, were riddled with problems. Scott's confession shifted wildly depending on what detectives fed him. He described things incorrectly, only to be corrected until his story matched police theory. Springsteen also confessed, but later recanted, saying he had been coerced. Neither man's story lined up perfectly with the physical evidence. Still, prosecutors ran with it. In 2001, Robert Springsteen was convicted of murder and sentenced to death. In 2002, Michael Scott was convicted as well and given life in prison. At last, it seemed, Austin had found its killers. But almost immediately, cracks begin to appear. Biggest issue? No physical evidence tied the men to the crime. The DNA found at the scene didn't match any of them. The supposed murder weapon, Pierce's .22 pistol, also wasn't linked. The entire case rested almost entirely on shaky confessions. Defense attorneys shredded the prosecution in appeals. They argued, convincingly, the confessions had been coerced and that the state had ignored evidence pointing elsewhere. The courts eventually agreed. In 2006, Springsteen's conviction was overturned, and in 2007, Scott's followed. Even then, prosecutors tried to keep the case alive. They prepared for new trials, arguing that they still had enough evidence. But in 2009, when retesting confirmed again that the DNA didn't match any of the 4 men, the charges were dropped entirely. That left the families of the victims devastated all over again. After almost 2 decades, they had endured trials, media coverage, and the promise of justice, only to see it collapse in court. The so-called yogurt shop killers walked free, and the case slid back into its unsolved status. The wrongful arrests cast a long shadow over the investigation. Critics accused the Austin PD of tunnel vision, of being more concerned with securing convictions than finding the truth. Others pointed out the clear flaws in relying on confessions, especially when they came after hours of intense manipulative interrogation. For years after, the case was seen as the textbook example of how not to investigate. Police had wasted time, destroyed lives, and left the real killers free. The damage wasn't just legal, it eroded public trust. People began to doubt whether the case would ever be solved at all. By the late 2000s, the yogurt shop murders felt cursed. Every lead fizzled, every breakthrough turned out to be smoke and mirrors, and yet, detectives refused to let go. Quietly in the background, DNA technology was evolving, and with it, the chance that science could finally do what years of faulty police work had not managed to. For over 3 decades, the Austin yogurt shop murders seemed like the ultimate dead end, a crime so brutal, so messy and so botched by investigation that it felt destined not to rot in the cold case files forever. But then came the slow grind of science, persistence and, frankly, plain luck. And in 2025, 34 years after the fire was put out, Austin police finally had an answer. The suspect's name? Robert Eugene Brashers, and if that name doesn't ring a bell, that's because Brashers never got his chance in court. He'd taken his own life back in 1999 during a standoff with Missouri police. It turns out, though, the man lived a double life as a violent predator, and according to investigators, a serial killer linked to crimes across multiple states. And here's how they got there. Back in 1991, investigators collected SA kits and a handful of fragments from the burned-out shop, including a single .380 shell casing pulled from a drain. DNA technology at the time was in its forensic toddler years. Labs could barely scratch the surface of what we can do now. Most of the evidence was wrecked by the fire itself or the water used to put it out. For years, all detectives had were dead ends, false confessions, and a case file thick enough to choke a horse. In the 2000s, advances in DNA testing led to partial profiles. SDR testing, which looked specifically at the male chromosome, excluded the original 4 suspects. Charges against them were dropped, and investigators knew that they were back to square one. Enter Detective Daniel Jackson, who picked up the cold case in 2022. Jackson didn't just recheck the evidence, he started linking it to wider databases. In 2025, he ran that lonely .380 shell casing through the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network. Suddenly there was a match to a cold case in Kentucky. From there, the threads unraveled fast. DNA evidence from Austin was compared with cases in South Carolina, Tennessee and Missouri. The patterns were chilling. Victims tied with their own clothing. SA committed with terrifying control. Multiple calibers of weapons used in a single attack. Every road pointed back to Brashers. Brashers, it turned out, had been arrested in 1985 for shooting a woman in Florida who rejected him. He got 12 years, served only 4, and was back on the streets by 1989. Over the next decade, he racked up a hidden trail of violence: a 1990 murder in Greenville, South Carolina, a 1997 grape in Tennessee, a 1998 shooting in Missouri. The yogurt shop murders, as horrific as they weren't even his only atrocity. And by the late 2000s, genealogy testing of Brashers' relatives finally tied his DNA to multiple unsolved assaults and murders across the US. But it wasn't until recent retesting of the Austin evidence that the final nail was hammered in. His DNA was found in 3 of the yogurt shop victims' SA kits, and most damningly, under Amy Ayer's fingernails. The match wasn't ambiguous. The odds it wasn't Brashers were 2.5 million to 1. Detectives believed Brashers acted alone. He waited until closing time, bound and gagged the girls with their own clothes, SA'd them, shot each in the head, and then set the shop on fire to erase evidence. The only reason the case was finally solved was Amy Ayres, in her final moments, fought back, leaving DNA under her nails that survived 3 decades of flawed investigations. When the news broke in 2025, Austin officials didn't just announce the end of a cold case. They admitted they'd uncovered the true scope of a predator. They hadn't just solved the yogurt shop murders, they'd unmasked a serial killer. For the families, it wasn't closure. How could it be? But it was the truth, finally, after 34 long years. The Austin yogurt shop murders haunted the city for more than 3 decades. For years, the case was a symbol of everything that can go wrong in investigation: contaminated evidence, false confessions, and grieving families left to suffer through trial after trial with no answers. It became one of those infamous unsolvable crimes, the kind that inspires documentaries, conspiracy theories, and endless speculation. But in 2025, the truth finally clawed its way out of the ashes of that burned out shop. The answer wasn't a teenage gang or a wild satanic cult. It was Robert Eugene Brashers, a violent drifter with a proven history and murders across the country. A man who, had he lived past 1999, would almost certainly have faced trial as one of America's most dangerous serial predators. For the family of Amy Ayres, Eliza Thomas, and Jennifer and Sarah Harbison, justice came far too late. Their lives were stolen in the most brutal way possible. No conviction, no press conference, no neat ending can restore what was lost. But at least the fog has lifted. The monster now has a name, and the girls are no longer just victims of an unsolved mystery. They are remembered as the ones who finally revealed the truth. Thank you for watching this episode of Echoes of the Unknown. It's a case I've known about for a long time, and so I was really happy to find out it had finally been solved, thanks to all the science. I'm glad in a way it was because of Amy fighting back that we have this closure. It's the very least that those girls deserved. So there you have it. A brutal slaying finally solved, all because of persistence and the miracle of science. Thanks again for watching. If you like this episode and want to see more, remember to give the like button a little fiddle, hit the subscribe and share with anyone you can. It would really help me out a lot, so thank you very much. I'll be back again next week, and as we enter spooky season, I've got a few little things planned, so stay tuned, stay safe, and remember to keep listening for the echoes. It was a quiet Friday night in Speedway, Indiana. The streets were calm, the autumn air carrying a faint chill, and at a small burger chef restaurant on Crawfordsville Road, 4 young employees were finishing up their closing shift. 16-year-old Mark Flemons, 17-year-old Ruth Shelton, 16-year-old Danny Davis, and their 20-year-old manager Jane Freet, packing up, mopping floors, counting the day's earnings, and preparing the store for the morning crew. It was a routine night, just another closing shift at a fast food restaurant. No one could have imagined what would unfold. By midnight, the store was silent. The back door stood wide open. The cash register had been tampered with, and the safe was emptied. But the employees were nowhere to be found. At first, the disappearance seemed like a case of teenage irresponsibility. Maybe the youths had skipped town for a night. By the next morning, as families realized their loved ones hadn't returned home, the town sensed something far more sinister had occurred. Speedway, a quiet town known for its proximity to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and its safe suburban streets, was about to face a nightmare that would haunt the community for decades. Within 48 hours, the truth would be revealed. 4 employees would be found lifeless in a wooded area miles from the restaurant, still wearing the uniforms that marked the final moments of their young lives. What began as a seemingly simple night shift would turn into one of Indiana's most haunting unsolved murders, a mystery that would baffle investigators for generations. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, where we delve deep into the unexplained, the mysterious, and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we'll be looking at the haunting tragedy of the Burger Chef murders, a case that to this day remains unsolved. Speedway, Indiana in 1978 was a town defined by the roar of race cars at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and quiet suburban streets where neighbors knew one another. It was a community that prided itself on safety, where teenage jobs at local businesses were a rite of passage, and fast food restaurants provided both work experience and a place to socialize. Among these, Burger Chef on Crawfordsville Road was a staple. The restaurant was staffed largely by teenagers and young adults, eager to earn their own money and gain independence. On November 17, 1978, the closing shift was led by 20-year-old Jane Freet, a responsible and diligent manager. Alongside her were 3 employees, 16-year-old Mark Flemons, covering an extra shift, 16-year-old Danny Davies, and 17-year-old Ruth Shelton. Together, they had formed a small team familiar with the nightly routines of cleaning, restocking, and securing the restaurant. Despite the town's calm reputation, Speedway was not completely untouched by crime. Earlier that year, the community had been rattled by a series of random bombings in September, creating an undercurrent of fear and uncertainty. Brett Kimberlin, who would later be convicted of these bombings, had become a local figure of menace, and while the crimes were ostensibly unrelated to the Burger Chef murders, they contributed to a heightened sense of vulnerability in the town. Adding to the tension was the murder of Julia Cyphers, a 65-year-old woman, whose violent death earlier that year had left residents unsettled. Authorities briefly speculated whether the murder of Cyphers could have been connected to the bombings or other crimes in the area, fueling rumours and fear. Speedway, though small, was beginning to feel like a town where random, senseless violence was entirely possible. Within this backdrop, the Burger Chef restaurant functioned as both a workplace and a social hub for its teenage employees. Jane Freet was well liked and known for her reliability. Mark Flemons, though young, had stepped in to cover shifts, demonstrating loyalty and responsibility. Danny Davis and Ruth Shelton were enthusiastic about their jobs, enjoying the routine and camaraderie of working together. The store itself was modest, with a safe in the back and standard registers, its security measures considered sufficient for a small-town business. In the weeks leading up to November 17th, other fast food restaurants in the area had been targeted by petty thefts and burglaries. Cash had been taken from registers and alarms had occasionally been tripped. Nothing violent had occurred. To the community, these incidents were annoying, yet manageable, crimes that seemed opportunistic rather than threatening. The combination of prior local crimes, the undercurrent of fear from the bombings, and the growing awareness of petty thefts at fast food restaurants set the stage for an event that would shock Speedway to its very core. What would unfold at the Burger Chef that night would shatter the town's sense of safety and haunt its residents for decades. 4 young lives, in the prime of their youth, were about to be swept into a violent and inexplicable tragedy. November 17, 1978 began like any other Friday night at the Burger Chef on Crawfordsville Road. The closing shift was routine, sweeping, mopping, restocking, and counting the day's earnings. Jane Freet, 20, took the lead, ensuring that everything was properly secured before the store closed for the night. Alongside her were Mark Flemons, 16, who had stepped in to cover a shift, 16-year-old Danny Davis, and 17-year-old Ruth Shelton. As the clock neared 11 p.m, the team worked diligently, unaware that the night would end in tragedy. Customers had long since left, the neon signs flickering against the darkened streets outside. The teenagers followed their usual closing procedures, placing cash in the safe, organising registers, and preparing the store for the morning crew. Around this time, a 16-year-old witness passing by outside noticed 2 men lingering near a parked car. Both appeared to be in their 30s, one bearded, the other fair-haired and clean-shaven. The men watched the restaurant, and when the employees emerged to take out the trash or move stock, they were seen entering the building's vicinity. This sighting would later become a key piece of the investigation, suggesting that the 4 employees were being observed, possibly targeted. Sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight, the employees vanished. Jane's Chevrolet Vega was found partially locked elsewhere in town, adding to the confusion. Initially, the disappearance seemed to be a case of teenage mischief. Perhaps they decided to leave abruptly for a night out. Yet the open back door, the emptied safe, and 2 empty currency bags hinted at something far more sinister. A roll of adhesive tape found near the safe suggested premeditation. Inside the store, the registers contained over $100 in coins, untouched, indicating that the theft alone was unlikely the sole motive. Purses and jackets were left behind, personal items untouched. It was as if the intruders wanted to remove the employees specifically, not simply rob the business. By midnight, the absence of the four became undeniable. Employees and local residents reported their concerns, and the town, initially dismissive, began to sense that something was terribly wrong. The witness sightings, combined with the suspicious open door and emptied safe, painted a chilling picture. These young lives, so full of promise, were about to be swallowed by an unthinkable horror, a violent, premeditated crime that would forever haunt Speedway. In the early hours of November 19th, the town of Speedway began to realise the depth of the tragedy. 4 young employees of the Burger Chef, Jane, Mark, Ruth and Danny, had not returned home at all. Families grew frantic, calling friends and local authorities, desperate for answers. What began as a routine night shift had turned into a nightmare. It wasn't long before hikers traversing the woods over 20 miles from the restaurant stumbled upon a horrifying scene. The bodies of the 4 victims lay scattered, each telling a silent story of violence and panic. Ruth Shelton and Danny Davis had been shot multiple times in the back of the head. Jane Freet had been stabbed twice in the chest, the handle of the knife broken off, a brutal testament to the struggle that had unfolded. Mark Flemons, tragically, had been bludgeoned and choked on his own blood, likely after hitting his head during a confrontation. All 4 still wore their Burger Chef uniforms, a haunting reminder of their last moments. The initial police response was criticised for its missteps. The restaurant had been cleaned and reopened before photographs were even taken, eliminating crucial evidence. Investigators initially assumed a petty theft or teenage escapade, failing to immediately recognise the gravity of the situation. Valuable leads like the roll of adhesive tape and empty currency bags near the safe were nearly overlooked. Over the years, leads came and went. Police questioned multiple suspects, some of whom resembled the eyewitness descriptions of the bearded and fair-haired men seen outside the restaurant. Names of individuals allegedly connected to a fast food robbery gang surfaced, yet without confessions or physical evidence, arrests were impossible. Investigators scoured surrounding states, Cincinnati, Milwaukee, Chicago, Dallas, chasing leads, but the case remained cold. Breakthrough seemed to appear in 1984 when Donald Wayne Forrester, a 30-year-old offender serving a lengthy sentence, contacted authorities claiming involvement in the murders. Forrester told police that Jane Freet's brother owed money on a drug deal, and he, along with 3 associates, had gone to the restaurant to intimidate her. According to his confession, Mark Flemons unexpectedly intervened, leading to a violent confrontation. Believing Mark was dead or dying, Forrester and his accomplices decided to abduct and kill the remaining employees to eliminate all witnesses. Forrester detailed the sequence of killings. He claimed to have shot Danny Davis and Ruth Shelton, while the deaths of Jane Freet and Mark Flemons were carried out by his accomplices. He even led authorities to the wooded area where the bodies were found and described the broken handle of the knife, knowledge not widely publicised. Shell casings matching the type of firearm used in the murders were later found at his residence after a septic tank search, leading some credibility to his confession. Yet Forrester's story soon unravelled. After initial cooperation, he recanted, claiming his confession had been coerced. Discrepancies emerged. One man he implicated was verifiably in prison the night of the murders, and certain details just did not align with the crime scene. Authorities lacked the evidence needed to prosecute. Forrester would eventually die in prison in 2006, leaving the case unresolved. Throughout the decades, the Burger Chef murders continue to haunt Speedway. Thousands of hours of investigation, coupled with the $25,000 reward offered by the chain, failed to bring justice. Families mourned without closure, while law enforcement kept the case open, revisiting old leads and incorporating modern DNA tracing techniques. The murders became a chilling reminder of how one night of violence could ripple through a quiet community, leaving scars that decades could not erase. For decades, Burger Chef murders remained a confounding mystery, brutal deaths of 4 young employees defying simple explanation. Over the years, Investigators, journalists and true crime enthusiasts have pieced together theories, each attempting to explain the unthinkable events of November 17, 1978. While some focus on criminal gangs, others point to personal vendettas, drug-related disputes, or even the chaotic consequence of impulsive decisions. No theory has fully satisfied investigators, leaving the murders officially unsolved. The earliest theory, and the one initially considered by local law enforcement, centered on a botched fast food robbery. In the months leading up to the murders, Burger Chef restaurants and other fast food establishments in Indiana have been targeted by thefts and burglaries. Witnesses recall suspicious vehicles and individuals in the area on the night of the crime, suggesting a connection to a robbery gang. A 16-year-old witness even described two men outside the restaurant before closing, one with a beard, one fair-haired, both in their 30s. Police created clay models of the suspects and followed leads across multiple states. Some individuals later imprisoned for other armed robberies fit these descriptions, but without direct evidence tying them to the murders, the theory remains speculative. Another line of inquiry involved Jane Freed's brother, who was connected to a local motorcycle gang and the drug trade. Some investigators theorized that Jane may have been drawn into a situation involving debt repayment or gang disputes. Authorities briefly detained her brother, considering whether he or his associates may have orchestrated the attack. However, he was released within 6 days due to insufficient evidence. Though compelling, this theory would not be substantiated. The confession of Donald Wayne Forrester in 1984 provided a third potential explanation. Forrester, a known offender serving a long prison sentence, admitted to being involved in the murders. According to his account, he and 3 associates went to the restaurant to confront Jane's brother over a drug debt. Mark Fleming's unexpected intervention escalated the situation. Leaving Mark to be dead or dying, Forrester and his accomplices allegedly killed all 4 employees to eliminate witnesses. He claimed to have shot Danny Davis and Ruth Shelton, and knew details of the knife's broken handle and other crime scene information not widely publicised. Shell casings discovered at his residence matched the firearm used in the murders, yet inconsistencies in his story, such as placing individuals at the scene who were verifiably elsewhere, and his eventual recantation, prevented charges being filed. Forrester's death in 2006 left this potential solution unresolved. In 2018, a renewed public focus came with the release of the docudrama The Speedway Murders, created by Australian filmmakers Luke Rinderman and Adam Camion. In their investigation, a man named Tim Boyer revealed that his friend Jeff Reed had confessed to the killings. Reed, known locally as the mayor of the Snake Pit, allegedly saw Jane's car outside the restaurant and went inside to confront her over an owed debt. According to Boyer, a confrontation escalated. Reed reportedly knocked Mark Fleming unconscious and, fearing the repercussions, forced the other employees into his van. Initially intending to release them safely, the situation allegedly spiraled, resulting in the deaths of all 4. Boyer claimed he was the only person who knew this secret for 40 years. Boyer's testimony was partially corroborated by witnesses, including Alan Pruitt, who recalled seeing Reed and another man, Tim Willoughby, near the restaurant. Reed drove a yellow Ford van, consistent with multiple eyewitness accounts of a yellow or orange vehicle outside the Burger Chef that night. Reed's physical description, brown hair, bushy beard, matched that of the bearded suspect observed by witnesses. Tim Willoughby, his alleged accomplice, has never been located and remains missing since 1978. Reed himself died of stomach cancer in 2011, leaving these accounts unverified in a court of law. Docudrama's revelations sparked new speculation. Some theorists suggest a domino effect, an intended minor confrontation escalated tragically, with Reed or other assailants improvising lethal measures. Others question whether Reed acted alone or as part of a larger yet unidentified group. The presence of cash in the victim's pockets and personal items left untouched suggests that the robbery may not have been the primary motive, lending weight to theories involving targeted intimidation or retaliation. Some investigators have explored psychological profiling, attempting to reconcile the sudden escalation of violence with behavioural patterns. Reed, described as alternately charming and aggressive, fits a profile of someone capable of impulsive brutality when pressured. Forrester, similarly, exhibits characteristics of someone seeking control and recognition, explaining his partial confessions and the consistencies therein. Despite the passage of nearly 50 years, other questions linger. How exactly were the employees subdued and transported to the wooded area? Why were the murders carried out with such a mixture of firearms, knives, and blunt instruments? Were there additional unknown participants? And why did key suspects either die or disappear before definitive justice could be achieved? Ultimately, each theory offers a partial lens through which to view the tragedy, yet none provides closure. Fast food robbery gang, the drug-related confrontation, Forrester's confession, and Reed's alleged admission each contain compelling elements, yet gaps and contradictions persist. These overlapping narratives, interwoven with speculation, witness testimony, and decades-old investigative errors, have turned the Burger Chef murders into a labyrinth mystery, a puzzle that continues to baffle authorities and haunt the Speedway community to this day. Decades after that fateful night, the Burger Chef murders continue to loom over Speedway, Indiana, a chilling reminder of how quickly a small-town routine can be shattered by unimaginable violence. While the passage of time has eroded some memories, it has also amplified the determination of families, investigators, and true crime enthusiasts to seek justice. In the summer of 2018, the Speedway community, alongside family and friends of the victims, raised funds to create a lasting memorial. 4 red oak trees were planted, each dedicated to one of the victims: Jane Freet, Mark Flemons, Ruth Shelton, and Danny Davis. Plaques beneath the trees provide short biographies, honouring their lives and preserving their memory for future generations. With surplus funds, a marble bench was added, offering a place of reflection, mourning, and remembrance. On November 10, 2018, just a week before the 40th anniversary, a small dedication ceremony was held at Leonard Park, bringing families together and the community in solemn tribute. Same year, Australian filmmakers Luke Reiderman and Adam Kemian released The Speedway Murders, a docudrama that reignited public interest in the case. No painstaking research and interviews with individuals who had never spoken to the police, the film shed new light on possible perpetrators, including the alleged involvement of Jeff Reed and insights from Tim Boyer. The documentary prompted renewed tips to law enforcement and reminded the public that, despite decades of uncertainty, the case remains very much alive in the collective consciousness. Law enforcement continues to keep the investigation open. Modern forensic techniques, including DNA tracing and evidence re-examination, have been applied in hopes of uncovering leads that were impossible to pursue in 1978. While no arrests have been made, authorities maintain that any credible information will be followed rigorously. A combination of a heartfelt memorial and the resurgence of public scrutiny has created a renewed sense of urgency. Families in the community, long denied closure, now look to the future with hope that one day the mystery of that night will be solved. Until then, the Burger Chef murders remain a haunting, unresolved chapter in Speedway's history. A story of lives cut tragically short, and a case that refuses to fade from memory. Burger Chef murders remain one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. 4 young lives, that of Jane Freet, Mark Flemons, Ruth Shelton, and Danny Davis, were violently cut short on an ordinary November night, their deaths rippling through the Speedway community and leaving scars that decades have yet to heal. Despite confessions, recantations, and countless leads, the case has never been resolved. Donald Wayne Forrester's admission, Jeff Reed's alleged confession to Tim Boyer, and suspicions surrounding drug-related disputes and robbery gangs all provide pieces of a puzzle that refuses to fit neatly together. The absence of definitive evidence and the deaths or disappearances of key suspects has kept the truth tantalizingly out of reach. Yet the legacy of the victims endures. Memorials, documentaries, and renewed public interest ensure that they are never forgotten. Each year the community recalls the tragedy, honouring their lives while hoping for answers. The Burger Chef murders remind us how a single night of violence can shatter lives and a whole town, and how the pursuit of justice, even decades later, remains both vital and elusive. Until the perpetrators are held accountable, the mystery endures, a dark chapter in Speedway's history that continues to captivate, horrify, and mourn. do you think happened on that fateful day? Was it a robbery gone wrong, a targeted attack, or something else? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching Echoes of the Unknown. If you like what we do here and want to hear some more unbelievable and unexplained events, don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the notification bell for updates. But until that time, keep listening for the echoes. On the night of October 31st, 1978, the quiet streets of Haddonfield, Illinois were lit by the flicker of jack-o'-lanterns and the laughter of children. By dawn, that small Midwestern town would be forever changed. What began as a typical Halloween evening descended into a night of unrelenting horror, a sequence of brutal murders that would become known as the Babysitter Murders. The events of that night have since been dissected, debated and mythologized. One fact remains: the man responsible vanished before authorities could bring him to justice. Decades later, his crimes continue to haunt Haddonfield, not just because of their savagery, because of what they represented: the intrusion of pure, motiveless evil into ordinary life. This is the story of the Halloween killings and the enduring mystery of what happened to the babysitter murderer. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, where we dive deep into the unsolved, the unexplained and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we're looking at the 1978 babysitter murders, where 4 people lost their lives and their killer fled into the night, leaving only a shadow and a legend behind. If you like this content and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe, like and share so we can give you more stories that will fascinate and terrify you. But for now, as we enter spooky season, this is the story of the babysitter murders. Even before it became synonymous with costumes and candy, Halloween was born out of something far older and darker. Its roots trace back over 2,000 years to the Celtic festival of Samhain, celebrated at the end of the harvest season. The Celts believed that on this night, the boundary between the living and the dead grew thin, allowing spirits to cross over into the mortal world. Fires were lit to ward off the restless dead, and disguises were worn to confuse malevolent entities. When Christianity spread throughout Europe, Samhain evolved into All Hallows' Eve, the night before All Saints' Day, a time meant to honour the faithful departed. The old traditions never truly died. They blended with the new faith, giving rise to the Halloween we know today, a strange fusion of reverence and revelry. By the 20th century, the holiday had crossed the Atlantic and become a staple of American life. In small towns like Haddonfield, Halloween was a night for innocent mischief, for trick-or-treaters, haunted houses, and laughter. But in 1978, that changed forever. The very night once meant to protect people from the spirits of the dead became the setting for one of the most chilling murder sprees in modern American history. And from that point on, Halloween, in Haddonfield and beyond, would never feel quite the same again. To really understand what happened on that fateful Halloween night, we must first rewind some 15 years. On October 31st, 1963, the Myers family home in Haddonfield, Illinois, was alive with the sounds of Halloween, distant laughter from trick-or-treaters, the rustle of autumn leaves against the windows, and upstairs, the faint hum of transistor radio. Judith Myers, 17 years old, was doing what most teenagers did on that night. She'd handed out candy, gone upstairs very briefly with her boyfriend, and probably thought little of her quiet 6-year-old brother waiting somewhere downstairs in his clown costume. Judith was bright, rebellious in that harmless teenage way, and by all accounts a caring sister. No one would have guessed that, before the night was over, she'd become the first victim in one of the most infamous crimes in Illinois history. At around 10 p.m, Judith's boyfriend left the house. Minutes later, Michael Myers, her 6-year-old brother, crept up the stairs, a kitchen knife in his hand and a mask covering his small face. What followed lasted less than a minute. A flurry of violence so sudden and cold, it stunned even seasoned investigators. When police arrived, they found Judith lifeless on the bedroom floor, stabbed repeatedly. Downstairs, Michael stood outside, still clutching the bloodied knife, his expression calm, almost blank. Neighbours recall the eerie quiet that followed. No screaming, no crying, just silence. When Michael's parents returned, they'd found their son waiting for them on the front lawn, as though nothing had happened. That image, a small boy in a clown mask holding a knife, would haunt Haddonfield forever. Michael was immediately taken into custody and transferred to Smith's Grove Sanitarium, where he would remain for the next 15 years. He was placed under the care of Dr. Samuel Loomis, a psychiatrist, who would become both his caretaker and his most persistent adversary. Loomis quickly realised that Michael wasn't just disturbed. He was something quite different altogether. "I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face," Loomis would later say, "and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes." In the years that followed, Michael never spoke another word. He didn't react to stimuli, didn't respond to therapy, didn't show any emotion of any kind. Nurses reported unsettling incidents, Michael standing motionless in corners for hours, sudden bursts of violence, drawings filled with masks and knives. Dr. Loomis came to believe Michael was not insane in the traditional sense. He wasn't delusional or psychotic. He was simply evil. Pure, quiet, and patient. Evil. Then, on the rainy night of October 30th, 1978, during a routine transfer, that evil slipped free. As Loomis and a nurse arrived at the sanitarium, they saw patients wandering the grounds in the dark, the gates open, the guards missing. Michael Myers would escape, stealing Loomis's car and disappearing into the night. The next day was Halloween, and Haddonfield had no idea that the boy who murdered his sister 15 years earlier was coming home. October 30th, 1978, the day before Halloween. A cold rain swept through the Illinois countryside as Dr. Samuel Loomis drove towards Smith's Grove Sanitarium, unaware that the patient he'd spent 15 years trying to contain was about to vanish into the night. Michael Myers had been locked away since 1963, after murdering his sister Judith at the age of 6. For a decade and a half, he'd barely spoken a word, silent, unblinking, seemingly hollow. To Loomis, Michael wasn't simply insane, he was evil itself. He warned anyone who would listen that Myers was beyond rehabilitation, but by the late 1970s, budget cuts and bureaucracy ruled mental health care, and Michael was due for a court appearance in Haddonfield. As Loomis and nurse Marion Chambers drove up to the facility that night, they noticed something strange. Patients wandering the ground in their hospital gowns, ghostly silhouettes against the rain. Loomis stopped the car to see. Something had gone terribly wrong. Then, from the darkness, a figure climbed onto the vehicle. There was shouting, glass shattering, and chaos. Nurse Chambers was thrown from the car. By the time Loomis reached her, it was too late. The state car was speeding off into the night. Michael Myers was now free. The following morning, near the rural town of Loom Lake, some 73 miles from Haddonfield, an abandoned truck belonging to a local mechanic was discovered. The truck's driver, a man named Joseph Phelps, was found nearby in the brush, stripped of his coveralls, his body showing signs of a violent attack. He'd been strangled and beaten around the head with his own wrench, which was found covered in blood nearby. From that moment on, the trail went cold. Michael was on the move, dressed now in the mechanic's dark blue uniform. To anyone passing by, he would have seemed just like another man walking alone on the roadside. Dr. Loomis knew better. He was already back in Haddonfield by then, warning the sheriff and anyone else who would listen that evil had returned home. Nobody believed him. But having visited Judith Myers' grave in Haddonfield Cemetery, he'd already discovered that a headstone had been removed. A sick joke by local kids? Or had Michael been there already? At around 4:14 p.m, the alarm bell at Nichols' hardware store rang out, signalling a break-in. The store had closed early that day due to a family emergency, and somebody had broken in, taking a Halloween mask, some rope, and a couple of knives. Police put this down to local miscreants causing trouble on Halloween, but as the day wore on, it would be evidence that the stolen loot would be used for more than just high jinks. By the time the sun set on October 31st, Michael had been missing for nearly 24 hours. Somewhere out there, silent, methodical, and unstoppable, he was preparing to kill again. The residents of Haddonfield had no idea that the shadows creeping between their pumpkins and porch lights weren't just kids playing dress up. The shape, as Loomis called him, had come home. To understand the events that unfolded in Haddonfield on Halloween night in 1978, you first have to understand the people who became part of it. Ordinary young people living in an ordinary small town. The kind of people you'd never expect to end up in a police report, let alone a national headline. Laurie Strode was 17 years old, quiet and studious. The kind of teenager who babysat for extra money and always remembered to lock the door behind her. She wasn't rebellious like some of her friends. She was grounded, cautious, the sensible one. Her friends teased her for being too good, but that sense of responsibility would later save her life. Laurie's circle included Annie Brackett and Linda van der Klok, both typical small-town girls, each with plans for the future. Annie was the daughter of Sheriff Lee Brackett, which added a touch of irony to what would follow. She was witty, confident, and endlessly sarcastic, the kind of person who filled any silence. Linda, meanwhile, was the cheerful and carefree one, the captain of the cheerleading squad. Her biggest concern that Halloween night was finding time to meet her boyfriend Bob Sims before curfew. Their plans were simple enough that night: to babysit, to hang out, and maybe sneak in a beer or two once the kids went to sleep. No one in Haddonfield suspected anything sinister was about to happen. After all, this was a safe place, the kind of town where people didn't lock their doors and kids roamed freely after dark. But something else was moving through the quiet streets that night. Something wearing a pale, expressionless mask. As Laurie walked to school that morning, she noticed a car slowly trailing her, an old station wagon with medical markings on the side. She thought this peculiar, but didn't overly worry. Throughout the day, she'd glimpsed the same figure standing in the distance, a man in a white mask, silent and still, just watching. Every time she looked, though, he was gone. While Laurie tried to dismiss it as nerves or coincidence, Dr. Loomis was racing back to Haddonfield, knowing exactly who that figure was. He'd warned Sheriff Brackett that death had come to his little town. Few took him seriously. The idea that the 6-year-old who'd murdered his sister 15 years before could have returned home felt absurd, like a ghost story meant to scare kids. As night fell, Laurie headed to babysit young Tommy Doyle, while Annie looked after Lindsay Wallace just across the street. It was a night like any other: popcorn, TV, and phone calls between friends. Until one by one, those calls went silent. The next few hours would turn their quiet suburban street into a scene of unimaginable horror. By morning, 2 families would awake to tragedy, one survivor would be forever changed, and the world would come to know a name that still sends chills down the spine: Michael Myers. Laurie Strode didn't set out to be a hero. On that Halloween night, survival became her only choice. For most people in the quiet Illinois town of Haddonfield, it was a night like any other. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed from porch steps, children ran door to door shouting trick or treat, and the small community settled into that familiar suburban calm. But for one 17-year-old babysitter named Laurie Strode, it would become the longest and most terrifying night of her life. Laurie's day began like any other. She was the responsible one amongst her friends, quiet, studious and dependable. That Halloween, she was set to babysit a young boy named Tommy Doyle, while her more carefree friends Annie Brackett and Linda van der Klok had their other plans. But as dusk fell, Michael was already there, watching from the shadows. He spent the day stalking Laurie. Her father was a local real estate agent, and that morning he'd entrusted his daughter to place the keys to the old Myers house under the porch mat in preparation for the arrival of prospective buyers. This is where it is believed that Michael first laid eyes on Laurie. From there, it is thought that he began stalking her, to her school, to her home, and finally to the Doyle residence. At one point, he even stood outside the schoolyard watching her from his car, a blank white mask gazing through the glass. Several townspeople reported seeing a tall man in overalls and a pale mask lurking behind hedges and trees. But Haddonfield wasn't used to fear. It's Halloween, Sheriff Brackett had told his daughter, and everyone's entitled to one good scare. But by nightfall, the scare became something else entirely. Michael's first confirmed victim that evening was Annie Brackett, Laurie's best friend. Annie had been babysitting across the street from Laurie, caring for a girl named Lindsay Wallace. When Allie's boyfriend called, she decided to drop Lindsay off with Laurie so she could meet him. As Annie left the Wallace house, she never noticed the shape moving silently behind her. The door was locked, so she went back for the keys. When she returned and climbed inside, Michael emerged from the back seat. There was a brief struggle, a strangled cry, the flash of a knife, and then silence. Her body was later found laid across the bed in the Wallace home, posed beneath Judith Meyer's stolen tombstone, a twisted tribute from Michael to his first victim 15 years earlier. Just a few moments later, Linda and her boyfriend Bob Sims arrived at the same house, unaware of the horror inside. After the two went upstairs, Michael struck again, this time killing Bob with brute strength, before strangling Linda with a phone cord. Her final gasps were heard on the other end of the line by Laurie, who mistook the noise for a prank. The killing of Bob showed exactly the pure, unadulterated rage inside of Michael that night. When detectives investigated the crime scene, they discovered he was killed with a single knife blow to the chest. What makes it more unnerving was that the wound had been so deep that it had actually penetrated his chest and exited through his back. Moreover, police found a deep knife mark in the kitchen wall, with Bob's blood marked into the wood. Placement of the strike into the wall, when matched with the wounds on the body, suggested that the killer had held the victim by the neck, lifting him off the ground, before impaling him with the final fatal blow. 3 of Laurie's friends were dead within an hour. Concerned by the strange phone call from Linda and the silence from Annie, Laurie crossed the street to check on her friends. The lights were out, and the air felt wrong. Inside, she found the bodies. Annie on the bed, Judith's tombstone looming over her, Bob hanging from the closet door, and Linda lifeless nearby. Then came the moment that would define her life. From the shadows behind her, Michael emerged, the same emotionless white mask, same dark eyes that had watched her all day. Laurie screamed and ran, throwing herself from down the stairs and forcing her way out of the kitchen, limping back to the Doyle house as Michael followed without a sound. A neighbour, Mrs. Elrod, heard her screams, and the young girl actually hammered on her door looking frantically for help. But Mrs. Elrod didn't answer. Talking to the press later, she stated that she thought it was the neighbourhood youths playing pranks, and the fact that she didn't help Laurie on that night stayed with her for the rest of her days. Laurie locked the doors, told Tommy to hide, and tried to calm her shaking hands. But Michael was relentless. He broke through the door, shattered the closet, stabbing through walls, each movement deliberate, mechanical, and unstoppable. Laurie fought back with sheer will, using knitting needles, a coat hanger, anything she could grab. For a moment, she thought she'd killed him with his own knife. When she turned her back, he rose again. It wasn't until Dr. Loomis arrived, guided by instinct and horror, that the nightmare paused. He burst into the Doyle house just as Michael lunged at Laurie once more, and fired 6 bullets into the killer's chest. Michael staggered backwards, fell through the balcony railing, and hit the ground below. But when Loomis looked again, Michael was gone. By dawn, Haddonfield police had secured the Doyle and Wallace houses. Reporters arrived, cordons were set up, and a stunned community tried to understand what had happened. 3 young people, Annie, Bob and Linda, plus Joseph Phelps, now confirmed to be Michael's first victim, were all pronounced dead. Laurie Strode was hospitalised for shock and minor injuries. Dr. Loomis told investigators the same thing he'd been saying for years. "I shot him 6 times, he repeated. Michael Myers is not human. He is pure evil." But as the sun rose over the quiet town, Michael Myers had vanished. The blood trail stopped at the backyard fence. No witnesses, no prints, no sightings. Search parties combed nearby woods, hospitals and back roads, but found nothing. Some locals claimed to see a man in a white mask watching from the tree line. Others said they heard heavy breathing over their baby monitors that night, but nothing concrete ever surfaced. The murders became known as the babysitter killings. Haddonfield's children grew up being warned to stay inside every Halloween night. The old Myers house was abandoned, then burned, then rebuilt. But still people whispered, because evil doesn't die, it just waits. Over the decades that followed, sightings of Michael Myers were reported across Illinois and beyond. A gas station attendant outside Russellville claimed he saw a tall man in overalls buying fuel, his face hidden behind a mask. Another report from Kentucky described a hitchhiker who matched Michael's description, silent, broad-shouldered, carrying a kitchen knife wrapped in a cloth. But nothing was ever proven. Some said Michael returned to Haddonfield every Halloween, blending into the costumed crowds before disappearing again at dawn. Others believed he died of his injuries that night, buried in an unmarked grave somewhere near Smith's Grove. Laurie Strode never publicly spoke about that night again. Rumours swirl to this day about what happened to her on various Reddit forums and internet sites. Some claim she died in a car accident not long after, while others say she changed her identity and moved to California to work as a teacher. Certain internet sleuths claim to have tracked her down to a profile on X, where the user is known to often rant about trauma and being thoroughly unpleasant. None of these rumours have ever been proven to be true. As for Dr. Loomis, he retired from practice soon after and authored several books about the night of Michael's great escape, including the best-selling You Only Live Twice: How the Babysitter Murderer Still Haunts America. His obsession led to his descent into alcoholism, and he passed away in 1995. And as for Haddonfield, Halloween would never be the same again. Even decades later, the legend of Michael Myers still hangs over Haddonfield like smoke after a fire, something you can't quite see, but you can still smell. What began as a single night of unimaginable horror has grown into one of America's most persistent unsolved mysteries. And, as with any mystery that refuses to rest, theories have filled the silence. The most credible explanation is also the simplest. Michael Myers survived. Despite being shot 6 times by Dr. Loomis and falling from the second-story balcony of the Doyle residence, no body was ever recovered. Officers found no trace of blood leaving away from the scene, no footprints, no drag marks, just the imprint of his body on the grass and the sound of distant wind chimes. Over the years, alleged sightings have trickled in from all over the Midwest. A silent figure walking outside Haddonfield Memorial Hospital in 1981. A masked man staring, spotted at a roadside mechanics store in 1988. A shape watching from the edge of children's Halloween parades in 1995. None ever verified. The question remains, did he live? Or did the idea of him simply refuse to die? Then there's the rumour that turned a local tragedy into something deeply personal. The claim that survivor Laurie Strode was actually Michael Myers' sister. The story goes that Laurie was adopted as a baby after their parents' deaths. Her identity changed to protect her from being the stigma of being the other Myers child. Those who support the theory point to Michael's apparent obsession with Laurie that night, how he seemed to stalk her specifically, bypassing others in his path. Some say the motive wasn't random evil at all, but unfinished business. Of course, no adoption record has ever surfaced, and Laurie herself never commented. Those close to the story insisted she was just an ordinary high school student caught in an extraordinary nightmare. To those who believe in blood curses and generational evil, the story fits a little too well. Another popular and far stranger theory suggests that Michael wasn't simply a murderer, but part of something ritualistic. Investigators who re-entered the abandoned Myers house years later reportedly found carvings in the basement walls, strange Celtic symbols linked to Samhain, the ancient festival that gave rise to Halloween. Internet investigators argue that Michael's killings coincided with the traditional Samhain calendar, suggesting the murders were part of a pagan sacrifice cycle meant to feed an ancient darkness. It's the kind of theory that would sound absurd anywhere else, but in Haddonfield, people don't laugh it off quite so easily. Also, because no legend is complete without conspiracy, some believe that Michael was eventually captured and silenced. Supposedly, government agents sealed his psychiatric records, and a mysterious federal transfer order appeared in 1982 under the initials MM. Story goes that he was taken into a secret facility for psychological study, the perfect emotionless killer, a government-made ghost. There's zero proof, of course, but like all conspiracies, it thrives because the truth is just empty enough to make room for it. Finally, the most unsettling theory, the one even Dr. Loomis himself hinted at, that Michael Myers was never entirely human. Some say he was a vessel for something ancient, a force that possesses and discards hosts like masks. That would explain his silence, his strength, and why bullets didn't stop him. If true, then Michael didn't just vanish into the night. He simply moved on, perhaps into another town, under another name and another mask. The reality may be even far simpler. Myers may have died that night. The chaos and the panic could easily have destroyed evidence or hidden his remains. The human mind hates loose ends. It wants shape in the shadows and meaning in the noise. So every Halloween, when someone swears they saw a man standing by the hedges in a white mask, people don't question it, because deep down, they know one thing. In Haddonfield, evil never dies. More than 4 decades have passed since that night in Haddonfield, yet the story of Michael Myers continues to haunt. The terror, the unanswered questions, and the scars left on survivors like Laurie Strode have cemented the events of October 31st, 1978 as more than a local tragedy. It has become a national obsession. What makes this case so chilling is not just the violence, but the uncertainty. Michael's escape, the possibility of his continued existence, and the rumours surrounding Laurie's identity and the nature of his crimes have allowed fear to persist long after the bloodshed has ended. Families and residents of Haddonfield were never given closure, and the legend of the babysitter murderer became a grim reminder of the fragility of safety. While some explanations lean towards the supernatural, ritualistic, or conspiratorial, the most likely reality is rooted in the tangible. A disturbed young man who committed unthinkable acts and whose fate after that night remains unknown. Haddonfield may have healed physically. The psychological shadow lingers. Halloween will never just be holiday there. It's a commemoration of lost innocence, the randomness of violence, and the enduring mystery of Michael Myers. A story that may never end. Thank you for watching this episode of Echoes of the Unknown, one of the more chilling cases we've covered thus far. One for the season as well, with Halloween just around the corner. So what do you think happened to the killer? What happened to Laurie? Was Dr. Loomis right all along? Pop your thoughts in the comments below. I've got loads of strange and unnerving cases coming up. There's one about a boy who drowned in a lake in 1957. He's been thought to have left a curse on the area ever since. There's also the story of a real-life exorcism in Washington in the early 70s. So if you want to know more about stories like that, remember to subscribe. Give the like button a good old fiddle and give the bell a bit of a tinkle for notifications. I'll be back soon, so enjoy spooky season. And also remember, until next time, keep listening for the echoes. What really happened to Elisa Lam? 21-year-old student who checked into Los Angeles' infamous Cecil Hotel and never checked out. Her last known moment, caught on a grainy elevator camera, became one of the internet's most haunting mysteries. Was she running from someone, talking to someone unseen? Or was it something darker? Tonight, we're diving into the case that still chills the world to this day. Baffling disappearance and death of Elisa Lam. Welcome to Echoes of the Unknown, the dark place where we delve into the creepiest mysteries, the strangest conspiracies, and the downright unbelievable. My name is James, and today we're looking at the bizarre case of Elisa Lam, whose death in 2013 at the Cecil Hotel in California has given us more questions than it has answers. Elisa Lam was born on April 30th, 1991 in Vancouver, Canada, the daughter of immigrants from Hong Kong. From the outside, she seemed like many young women her age, bright, curious and eager to explore the world beyond her hometown. Beneath that surface, Elisa was also wrestling with something deeply personal, a struggle with bipolar disorder and depression. On her blog, she wrote candidly about her mental health, her shifting moods, and the feeling of being caught between two worlds, hopeful one moment, overwhelmed the next. For many who later discovered her writing, these entries painted a portrait of a young woman searching for meaning, for adventure, and for connection. By 2013, Elisa had enrolled at the University of British Columbia, but her academic path had been interrupted more than once by her illness. Still, she refused to let setbacks define her. Like many 20-somethings, she longed to travel, to escape routine, to see the world beyond the safety of her neighbourhood. That January, she embarked on a solo trip down the west coast of the United States. She chronicled her adventures on her Tumblr blog, Nouvelle Nouveau, posting photographs, personal reflections of the kind of quirky observations that made her voice feel familiar to strangers who later stumbled across her case. Her words carried a mix of vulnerability and charm. She could be light-hearted and whimsical in one post, then deeply introspective in the next. Her journey took her through San Diego, Santa Cruz, and eventually Los Angeles. It was supposed to be an eye-opening trip, a brief escape before returning to school, and she often checked in with her parents, calling daily to reassure them that she was safe. They were protective, as parents often are, especially since Eliza was travelling alone and dealing with her health. But Eliza seemed determined to prove that she could do this, and step out into the world, independent and unafraid. When she arrived in Los Angeles on January 26, 2013, she checked into the Cecil Hotel, a building with a notorious reputation. Situated in downtown LA, not far from the struggling Skid Row district, Cecil was once a grand hotel from the 1920s and had long since fallen into decline. By the time Eliza stayed there, it had become a strange hybrid of budget accommodation for travellers and low-income housing for long-term residents. The hotel carried with it a darkness few buildings can rival. It had been the backdrop for suicides, murders and countless tragedies. Most chillingly, it had served as temporary lodging for not one but two infamous serial killers. In the mid-1980s, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, lived at the Cecil during his reign of terror across Los Angeles, murdering and assaulting his victims before returning to his room as if nothing had happened. And in the early 1990s, Austrian journalist turned serial killer Jack Unterweger also stayed at the hotel. He too preyed upon women in Los Angeles, allegedly luring sex workers before murdering them, all while masquerading as a visiting reporter writing about crime. The presence of these men added a layer of infamy to the hotel, turning it into something more than just a budget stopover. To many locals, the Cecil was cursed, a place where death and evil seemed to linger in the hallways. To Elisa, it was just another affordable hotel for her trip. But in hindsight, the choice of the Cecil Hotel would become one of the most haunting details of her story. She was originally assigned to a shared room, but after complaints from her roommates about what they described as odd behaviour, the hotel moved her into a private room. Exactly what her behaviour entailed was never fully disclosed. It raised early questions about how she was doing during her stay. Still, to the outside world, there was little sign of what was about to unfold. Elisa's blogs and her phone calls to her parents continued into the end of January. She seemed to be exploring the city, shopping for books, and enjoying the kind of small adventures that travel is meant to bring. But the days after her arrival, something would shift. By January 31st, Elisa would vanish from the face of the earth, sparking a mystery, soon captivate and terrify the world. At first, Elisa's trip seemed to be unfolding just as she had hoped. She made her way down the California coast, pausing in cities, visiting bookshops, and recording her impressions online. Her Tumblr posts were still frequent, filled with the kind of fleeting thoughts that paint a vivid picture of someone living in the moment. To her parents, she remained in steady contact, phoning home each day to reassure them that she was safe. On January 31st, 2013, calls stopped. That same day, Elisa was last seen in public at a bookstore near the Cecil Hotel. The store's owner later described her as bright and talkative, even recommending books she thought would make good gifts for her family. There was nothing about the encounter that suggested trouble, no sense that this was a young woman on the brink of something dark. But when her parents could not reach her that night, concern quickly set in. Elisa's family knew her well. She struggled, yes, but she was also responsible. And the sudden silence was deeply out of character. On February 1st, worry turned to fear. Her parents contacted the Los Angeles Police Department and reported her missing. Officers began by searching the hotel itself, canvassing the hallways, stairwells and common areas. They questioned staff and guests. No one seemed to know where she had gone. Elisa's belongings were still in her room, including her laptop, medication and clothing. There was no note, no message, no obvious sign of foul play. It was as though she had stepped out and simply never returned. For detectives, the case presented immediate challenges. Cecil was a sprawling building with hundreds of rooms and a transient population. Guests came and went constantly, many unwilling to cooperate with the police, and the surrounding neighbourhood, Skid Row, was a maze of crime, addiction and poverty. Searching beyond the walls of the hotel was like chasing shadows. Still, the police widened their efforts. Bloodhounds were brought in to trace Elisa's scent, and they came through the hotel from the basement to the roof. At one point, The dogs followed a trail that ended up at a window connected to a fire escape. Beyond that, they lost her. There's no indication she'd even left the building through normal means, and yet there was no sign of her inside either, as if she had vanished into thin air. The family, withdrawn, flew from Vancouver to Los Angeles to assist with the search. He stood beside investigators pleading for answers and clinging to hope that Elisa might be found well and alive. Days turned into a week. Posters went up around the city with Elisa's photo, bright smile staring back at strangers who knew her only as the missing girl from Canada. By February 6th, police made a desperate move. They held a press conference and released details to the media, hoping public exposure could spark a lead. But tips were scarce, and none led to Elisa. Then, on February 13th, nearly 2 weeks after she disappeared, the LAPD made a decision that would change the case forever. They released a piece of evidence that would seize the world's attention. A 2.5-minute clip of Elisa Lam's final known appearance, captured by a surveillance camera in one of the Cecil's elevators. What unfolded in that grainy footage would become one of the most infamous and unsettling videos on the internet. When the Los Angeles Police Department released the footage from the Cecil Hotel's elevator, they likely expected to jog a memory or bring forward a witness. Instead, it became something else entirely, an eerie, disturbing artifact that would spiral in one of the most analysed and unsettling internet mysteries of all time. The clip, just 2.5 minutes long, begins innocuously enough. Elisa steps into the elevator dressed in a red hoodie and shorts. She looks small in the frame, almost swallowed by the camera's grainy overhead view. He leans forward, presses a row of buttons on the panel, and then steps back. But something is immediately off. The doors do not close, and the elevator doesn't move. And Elisa's behaviour grows stranger with each passing second. She peers out into the hallway cautiously, expecting someone to follow her. She darts back inside, then edges out again, pressing herself against the wall. It looks to some viewers like a child's game of hide and seek, yet her body language carries a nervous, almost frantic energy. She presses more buttons, seemingly all of them, and yet still, the elevator refuses to budge. Then comes the moment that makes the video infamous. Elisa begins moving her hands in peculiar ways, gesturing at something unseen just outside the frame. Her arms twist and bend in exaggerated, almost dance-like motions. To some, it appears she was speaking to someone, maybe even arguing. No other figure is ever visible. For others, it looked like the motions of someone disorientated, hallucinating, or caught in the throes of a mental episode. And yet, countless viewers online, there was something about those movements that felt almost unnatural, as if she was interacting with something not of this world. Finally, Elisa steps out of the elevator entirely. The doors, which have remained stubbornly open the whole time, finally close after she leaves, as if mocking the viewer with the timing. For a moment, the empty elevator lingers on screen, silent and sterile, before the footage ends. When the video hit the internet, it exploded. Within days, millions had watched on YouTube and Chinese platforms like Youku, where it quickly went viral. Viewers described it as haunting, unnerving, even unwatchable. Comment sections filled with speculation. Was Elisa running from someone? Was she on drugs? Was she playing some kind of bizarre game? Or had she been possessed by something beyond explanation? What disturbed many was not just Elisa's behaviour, but the video itself. Sharp-eyed viewers noticed oddities. The timestamp appeared blurred or missing, as if edited. Footage seemed slowed down in places, and many claimed there was a full minute missing. Were the police withholding evidence? Had someone been deliberately cut out of the video? Theories piled up. The answers did not. And the strangest detail of all was this. No one ever came forward to say they saw Elisa in the moments after the footage ended. That elevator video remains her last known sighting alive. For investigators, the footage raised more questions than it answered. For the public, it cemented the case as something far more sinister than a missing person story. The world had just witnessed a young woman behaving in a way that defied easy explanation, and it would haunt viewers long after her body was discovered. As the strange elevator footage circulated online, The LAPD continued their physical search for the Cecil Hotel. By mid-February, nearly 3 weeks had passed since Elisa's disappearance, and tensions were rising. Guests at the hotel began complaining about something new: strange water pressure, discoloration, even a foul taste. Some described the tap water as dark, murky, with an almost sickly odour. Maintenance staff were dispatched to investigate the rooftop water tanks, large black cisterns that supplied the building's plumbing. On the morning of February 19th, a worker climbed a narrow staircase and hoisted himself up to check inside one of the tanks. What he saw would shock the world. Floating face up, completely naked, was the body of Elisa Lam. The discovery sent shockwaves through the hotel and beyond. Guests who had been showering, brushing their teeth and even drinking from the water were horrified. The Cecil quickly became a crime scene. Police cordoned off the building and forensic teams moved in. From the very start, investigators faced a baffling set of questions. The water tanks were not easily accessible. To reach them, Elisa would have had to make her way to the roof, an area secured by locked doors and alarms. The tanks themselves were massive, heavy metal containers, each more than 8 feet tall, with lids that were difficult to open. How could a petite 21-year-old woman have gained access, climbed inside, and sealed herself in without anybody noticing? The autopsy report did little to clear the fog. Released in June 2013, it concluded that Elisa's death was accidental. Drowning and bipolar disorder listed as a significant contributing factor. Toxicology tests revealed traces of her prescribed medication. No alcohol, no illicit drugs, no sign of foul play. Her body bore no evidence of physical trauma, no signs of SA or defensive wounds. For many, the official explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why were some of her prescription levels lower than expected, suggesting she may have been skipping doses? Could a lapse in medication account for her strange behaviour in the elevator? If so, why did no one see her make her way to the rooftop? And how had she managed to get into the tank, when even maintenance workers described the task as awkward and physically challenging? The investigation left gaps that conspiracy theories rushed to fill. Some pointed to the blurred, choppy elevator footage as proof of a cover-up. Others suggested Lisa had been pursued, forced onto the roof and murdered, her body dumped into the tank to hide the crime. Still others looked beyond the rational, proposing supernatural explanations tied to the hotel's dark history. The LAPD maintained that Elisa's death was a tragic accident, the result of disorientation, mental illness, and a dangerous environment. In the court of public opinion, the case was far from closed. The image of her body in that water tank, hidden in plain sight above a hotel teeming with life, would linger like a stain, fueling endless speculation. The elevator video had drawn the world's eyes to Elisa Lam. The discovery of her body transformed her from a missing woman into the centerpiece of one of the strangest, most haunting investigations in modern memory. If the discovery of Elisa Lam's body in the hotel's rooftop water tank was the tragic climax of her disappearance, the theories that emerged afterwards were the storm that refused to die down. Even after the coroner's report labelled her death an accident, the public wasn't satisfied. Something about the entire story felt unfinished, and the gaps in the evidence only made the mystery more combustible. What really happened to Elisa Lam? One of the most grounded explanations pointed towards her mental health. Elisa had been open about her struggles with bipolar disorder and her depression on her Tumblr blog. She wrote about the weight of her illness, about days when she couldn't get out of bed, and about the constant battle to feel normal. In her toxicology report, traces of her prescribed medication were found, but at lower levels than expected. Psychiatrists and skeptics alike, this suggested that she hadn't been taking her doses consistently. That detail, combined with her erratic behaviour in the elevator video, picked the picture of someone experiencing a manic or a psychotic episode. In this theory, Elisa's strange gestures in the footage weren't communication with an unseen figure. They were the frantic motions of a young woman losing touch with reality. Her apparent paranoia, the hiding in the elevator, the pressing of random buttons, it all aligned with symptoms of psychosis. From there, perhaps, she wandered onto the roof, disoriented, and managed to climb into the water tank herself. In the official narrative, this was a tragic but plausible answer, a young woman's fragile mental state colliding with the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet many rejected that conclusion. The question lingered: how could she have accessed the tanks at all? Hotel staff maintained the rooftop doors were locked and alarmed. To bypass them, Elisa would have needed either a key or to climb the exterior fire escape, an incredibly risky manoeuvre in her state of mind. Everyone there was the matter of the tank lids. They were heavy, designed to keep contaminants out. Should she really have lifted one, climbed inside, and somehow allowed it to close behind her? Maintenance workers insisted it would have been nearly impossible. For skeptics, this detail alone screamed foul play. The foul play theory took many forms. Some believed Elisa had been pursued, possibly by another guest or an employee of the hotel. The elevator video in this view shows her hiding from someone just out of frame, someone the LAPD deliberately edited out before releasing the footage. Once caught, perhaps she was forced onto the roof and drowned, her body concealed in the tanks. The blurred timestamp, the missing frames, all of it was interpreted as proof of a cover-up. Adding fuel to this fire was the Cecil Hotel's sordid history. This wasn't just any downtown building, it was infamous. In the 1980s, serial killer Richard Ramirez, dubbed the Night Stalker, lived on the top floor while terrorizing Los Angeles with his brutal murders. Guests whispered about his presence long after his arrest. A year later, in the 90s, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger also checked in, lured by the hotel's cheap rates and proximity to the city's red light district. He murdered 3 women during his stay. With such a pedigree of darkness, many wondered, was the Cecil itself cursed? Was Elisa just another victim in its long, sinister history? That speculation bled easily into the supernatural. Online forums lit up with theories that Elisa had been possessed or stalked by a malevolent force tied to the building. Strange hand gestures in the video were interpreted as occult signs, erratic behaviour as evidence of spiritual attack. The fact that the elevator doors refused to close until after she left became for some a chilling metaphor. The hotel itself wouldn't let her escape. Then came the stranger, more conspiratorial branches of the web. Some connected Elisa's death to a tuberculosis outbreak in Los Angeles' Skid Row at the very time. The name of the test used to detect the outbreak? The Lam Elisa test. Conspiracy theorists, the coincidence was just too perfect. Was Elisa a victim of some government experiment gone wrong? Her body silenced before she could reveal something larger? Others pointed out her trip itinerary, strange gaps in her online posts, even her Canadian citizenship, spinning webs of espionage, cover-ups, and bioweapons programs. And yet, for all the spiralling theories, the simplest questions remain unanswered. If Elisa climbed into the water tank on her own, then why? If she was murdered, why was there no evidence of any trauma? If the footage was edited, what was removed, and by whom? Every explanation seemed to crack under any pressure, leaving only more questions in its wake. What truly unsettled people wasn't just the mystery itself, it was the way the case seemed to resist closure. The mental health theory provided a tragic but rational explanation, yet felt incomplete. The foul play theory offered a darker, more sinister narrative, but lacked any hard evidence. And the supernatural theories, while compelling in their eeriness, belonged more to urban legend than into reality. In the end, the Elisa Lam case became a mirror. People projected their own fears, their own anxieties onto the story. For some, it was a cautionary tale about untreated mental illness. For others, it was evidence of corruption and conspiracy. For others still, proof that evil, human or otherwise, haunted the halls of the Cecil Hotel. Whatever the truth, Elisa's death transcended the label of an accident. It became a riddle, a puzzle that seemed to mock every attempt at a definitive answer. And perhaps that is why, more than a decade later, the case remains alive, not in police files, but in the restless imagination of the world. In the wake of Elisa Lam's death, the Cecil Hotel was thrust into an even darker spotlight. For years, the building had been synonymous with poverty, crime and tragedy. Elisa's case brought it back into the global infamy. Guests who had unknowingly consumed water from the very tank where her body was discovered sued the hotel, describing the liquid as foul-smelling, discoloured and undrinkable. Maybe not drink it then, that's probably the best thing to do. The lawsuits painted a grim picture that management had failed to protect its guests and ignored basic safety measures. But the Cecil's problems went far deeper than one case. The hotel had become a magnet for true crime enthusiasts, paranormal investigators and tourists drawn by morbid curiosity. In the years that followed, documentaries, YouTube deep dives, just like this one, and Netflix specials all dissected Elisa's final days. The elevator video became one of the internet's most analysed and rewatched clips, sparking countless debates and theories across Reddit, YouTube, and beyond. The building itself underwent a rebrand, renamed Stay on Main in a bid to shake its cursed reputation. But the shadow of Elisa Lam lingered. For many, the Cecil was no longer just a decaying downtown hotel. It was a symbol of how mystery, tragedy, and the digital age could collide to create a modern urban legend. In the end, Elisa's story became more than a case file. It became a cultural touchstone, a story that refused to be neatly explained, ensuring that both she and the hotel where her life ended would never be forgotten. The story of Elisa Lam is one that refuses to fade. More than a decade after her death, the questions still hang heavy in the air, unanswered and unresolved. On the surface, the explanation may seem straightforward, an accident born out of mental illness and misfortune. But when you peel back the layers, what you find is a story steeped in contradictions, in eerie coincidences, and in details that simply don't add up. The Cecil Hotel itself is part of the enigma. A building with a past soaked in blood and despair, it became a stage where one final act of tragedy played out. Whether you believe Elisa was a victim of circumstance, her own mind, or something darker that stalked those infamous hallways, her fate is now inseparable from the legend of the hotel. And then there's the elevator footage, the ghostly, unsettling video that launched Elisa's story into internet or immortality. Was it a cry for help, a breakdown captured on camera, or something else entirely? That haunting clip ensures that the mystery will never truly rest, replayed endlessly by millions who search for meaning in her movements. Elisa Lam's case is more than just true crime. It's a mirror reflecting our fascination with the unknown, our obsession with solving the unsolvable, and our need to find order in chaos. Perhaps we'll never have all the answers, and perhaps that's just the point. Elisa's life was brief and her death tragic, but her story endures, haunting the digital age like an echo from the shadows. And as long as people press play on that elevator video or whisper about the Cecil Hotel, the mystery will remain alive. Thank you for watching this video today, and let us know what you think happened to Elisa Lam. Was it a mental break, a crime, or something more unsettling? Pop a comment below with your thoughts. And once again, I've been James, and if you want to see more videos like these where we explore the creepiest mysteries, please like and subscribe. And most importantly, keep listening for the echoes.